In this video, we're going to have a brief overview of the cell cycle. This will be an introduction to what the cell cycle is, the general concept, so that when we go into the full lesson of the cell cycle and all the details, it'll be a bit easier to understand. Let's start off with a simple question. It might be simple, but some of you may not get it right, and that's okay, because it's actually a big misconception that a lot of people have. So, as you know, we grow. This is a baby, and it gets older and it grows, and then eventually this grows even more, and it becomes uh, a teenager and then an adult. But essentially, it gets bigger. Same thing with plants, right? You have a seed, and eventually it grows as well. So why do things grow? And so there's two options I want you to try to choose between. Do they get more cells or bigger cells? So just choose one. Pause the video, choose one, think about it. It's okay if it's wrong. You'll understand in more detail later on. So hopefully what you selected was option A, that you get more cells. So you actually get more cells, not bigger cells. You start off as one cell and then eventually become trillions of cells. And so we're going to take a look at how, as organisms that are multicellular, we go from having one cell to trillions and trillions of cells. And it's basically through this idea here called cell division. So we're going to learn about the general concept behind it, but the idea is that you start off with an original cell called the parent cell. That parent cell will basically kind of copy everything. It'll photocopy all of its DNA, all its organelles and everything. It'll double everything. And then it splits into two new cells after that. So it starts off with a bit of growing, meaning doubling everything, and then afterwards divides into two new cells that we call daughter cells. And so the reason that the parent cell has to kind of double everything first is because if it didn't, every time it divided, it would lose half of its genetic material. So let's say, for example, this parent cell has 46 chromosomes. Okay. If it didn't copy first, then each cell would have 23 chromosomes, and then that would have half and half and have it keep going in half. And then you lose more and more every time. So what happens first is we double first. So 46 chromosomes becomes 92 chromosomes. That's doubling. And then when they divide, back to 46. So let's go take a look at that in a bit more detail. So the big idea that I want you to sort of take away from this first part of the lesson here is that, let's go back. You grow because you get more cells, not because your cells get bigger. This is a human reproductive cycle. And so here we have two humans. They make gametes. So there's sperm and there's egg. The egg has 23 chromosomes, it's haploid. The sperm has 23 chromosomes, it's haploid as well, represented by the letter N. When the sperm fertilizes the egg, you get a diploid zygote, meaning this one cell is diploid. It has 46 chromosomes, 23 plus 23, 46. Now this one cell becomes trillions of cells, these fully grown humans over here. And so that happens through cell division, or what we call mitosis. Again, fertilization makes one cell called the zygote, but then that zygote, which is unicellular, becomes trillions of cells eventually, a multicellular organism. And we're going to study that process of mitosis to see how one becomes trillions, becomes multicellular. So this over here is the cell cycle, we call it. The cell cycle is essentially a cell's life. So it's basically a series of events that a cell goes through over and over and over and over again. And a cell, the ones that we study anyways, will essentially just sort of do two things. It'll grow and divide, grow and divide, grow and divide. So the growth stage of the cell cycle is actually the longest stage. It's called interphase. That's 90% of a cell's life. So if a cell lived for 100 hours, 90 hours is sort of growing and preparing to divide. That's where the cell is basically doubling everything, like doubling DNA and organelles and everything to make sure that all the cells that are produced have the same amount as the original. So cell cycle chart over here, the growth stage called interphase is 90% of the cell's life. So let's say the cell starts here, 90% growth, preparing to divide, a whole bunch of stuff happening here, doubling DNA organelles, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually when we're ready to divide, we go into the division stage. The division stage is called mitosis and cytokinesis. That's where the cell actually splits into two new cells. And that's only 10% of the cell's life. It's really important to spend a lot of time growing and preparing the divide so that you can ensure there's no mistakes, so that when the new cells are made, the the cells are the same as the original. And again, this division part, which is mitosis and cytokinesis, that's only 10% of the cell's life or cycle. And so the idea is that we're going to take a look at all the details in interphase and all the details in mitosis and cytokinesis. But for now, just get that cell cycle is basically the events that happen in a cell's life. They repeat over and over again. So a cell starts off here, prepares to divide. 90% of its life is just preparing to divide, growth, doubling DNA and organelles. And then once it's done, it will divide into two new cells through the process of mitosis and cytokinesis. And then those two new cells, they can go through this cycle again. So one of those cells will grow and divide, grow, then eventually divide, make two other cells, so on and so forth. And that's the cell cycle in a nutshell. So let's go take a look at that with some more pictures here. So here we have the original parent cell, and it's going to start off in interphase, which is where it's preparing to divide. So it doubles DNA and organelles, and so you can see in the animation I made it. We have it growing here, so it doubled organelles, doubled DNA, and now when it's all done that, it's ready to enter the division phase, which is where it's going to split into two new cells. The division phase really has sort of two parts to it. And so the two parts are mitosis and cytokinesis. Mitosis is where basically you're dividing the nucleus. So the DNA is being divided equally to both sides. So let's say we had 4 DNA in here. Well, 2 goes this way, 2 goes that way. And cytokinesis is physically splitting the cell up into 2. So we call that division of the cytoplasm. So again, let's replay that animation. We have a small parent cell here, the original cell you start off with, goes through interphase, so grows by doubling organelles and DNA. Now we go into the division phase, which starts off with mitosis. We divide the nucleus. In other words, we put the DNA, we separate the DNA equally to both sides of the cell. And then we go into cytokinesis, which is where we actually split the cytoplasm into 2. So we have 2 separate cells. The original parent cell started off with 2 DNA. It doubled, so it was 4. Then 2 went to each side. In the end, both daughter cells end up with 2 DNA each. Or you can talk about it in terms of the number of chromosomes that humans have. We had 46 in here. We doubled it to make 92 DNA. So now the 92 are split equally. So 46 go this way, 46 go that way. Cytokinesis happens, and now we have our 2 daughter cells, the 2 new cells with 46 each. The 2 daughter cells are identical to the original parent cell because the original parent cell just basically copied itself and then split to make 2 of itself. So they are identical to the original. The original is gone at this point. Remember, the original became these 2. So this copied itself and then split into 2 new cells. These can now go and do their own cell cycle if they need to do that. But they sometimes don't have to. But for now, we're going to assume they do. So again, new cells are called daughter cells. So here you can see the, let's take a look at another example. Let's say we had a parent cell with 10 DNA, okay? What's going to happen is the parent cell will double its DNA to have 20 DNA. And then during mitosis, 10 will go to each side. Then during cytokinesis, the cell splits into 2, and each daughter cell has 10 like the original parent cell had. So that's the whole point of doubling DNA, is so that when the cell splits, you don't have 5 and 5. You actually have 10 and 10 again, and their clones are identical to the original parent cell. And you can see that in this image here. So this is the original parent cell. We just wrote DNA as 1 DNA. It goes through interphase, so now it has 2 DNA. Mitosis is, let's split the DNA equally to both sides. So 1 DNA that way, 1 DNA that way. And cytokinesis is now split the cell into 2 separate cells that are now their own individual cells that can go through this cycle again. So what's the point of cell division? Well, there's 3 main reasons why an organism needs cell division or needs this cell cycle. And the 3 main reasons are growth, maintenance, and repair. So the first one is fairly straightforward. Cells divide so the organism can become bigger and grow. So a zygote, which is your individual cell that you start off as when you're first made, goes through cell division and becomes trillions of cells. So there was growth there. There's also maintenance. Many times your cells, as they're used, they become worn out and they die. So you have to replace those cells that are worn out and die. So for example, a snake, if you've ever heard of a snake or certain reptiles shedding their skin, That's basically their old skin cells are dead. Now they have to make new cells to replace those old skin cells. Um, and the same thing with us. We actually shed skin as well. Just we don't crawl out of our skin like a snake or a lizard would. Um, Repair is another important reason to for cell division. So if we ever damage our tissues, they can regenerate to a certain degree. So if we just think of a little cut, if you cut yourself, it heals. And so new cells are formed by cell division to replace the damaged cells. If you break a bone, new cells are formed by cell division to replace those the damaged bone. We can do that to a limited ability. Some animals and other organisms can regrow many more parts. So this organism over here, this worm, if you cut it in half, its cell division can actually just heal both halves. And so now you have two organisms where you only had one before. Some lizards can, if you cut their tail off, they'll regrow the whole tail. We can't do that because our cells are a bit too complex to do that, but we have some limited regeneration capabilities. So here's an example of cell division being important in us. So human red blood cells wear out every 120 days and they have to be replaced with stronger ones. So division helps you to make more of these cells. So remember, your red blood cells, they're the ones that carry oxygen throughout the body. They don't last very long, but 120 days. So they get worn out and damaged within that time, and so you have to get some new ones. So that's one reason why cell division is important. It allows us to get new red blood cells. This allows us to perform the maintenance aspect. We are maintaining our body by ensuring that anything that gets worn out, we can replace and have a good quantity of so we can keep using it. And again, you simply growing is an example of growth. And if you scratch yourself and break a bone and the cells make more of themselves to repair that scratch or broken bone, that's, well, repair. It's fixing. So these are the main reasons why living things need cell division. You can see over here, we have the salamander has a great ability to regenerate itself. So it's actually regenerating an entire limb here. And this worm over here, you cut it into different segments and it can actually produce two whole worms from the segments that you cut it into. Again, humans can regenerate too, but just not as good as this. And regeneration just basically means rebuild itself, fix itself, or repair itself. So one thing I highly recommend that you do, in the next lesson, we're going to be going over the cell cycle in more detail. So we'll be going over, let's go back here. We'll be going over all of these phases in detail. So we'll look at what's actually happening in the cell during interphase. We're zooming in and taking a look at the nucleus, chromosomes, and DNA. We're going to look at what happens during mitosis. We're going to zoom in, take a look at what's happening in the nucleus, and same thing during cytokinesis. So to prepare yourself to understand that idea, I highly recommend that you watch the video from the Amoeba Sisters over here, Cell Cycle and Cancer. You don't have to memorize everything from here, but maybe take a few notes and just try to plant some seeds and get the general idea as to what the details of the cell cycle are and how it might relate to cancer.